The device that you are using right now would not exist without one tiny island nation. And yes, Taiwan is a nation, and they are also Chinese, but they are not governed by the People's Republic as we know it today. It's all a bit complicated, which is half the reason that this island has become an inflection point on the modern political landscape. The other half is semiconductors. For over 3 decades, the world has been flooded by a deluge of advanced silicon microchips from Taiwan, and they have powered our modern world, enabling all of the technological magic that surrounds us on a daily basis. But this could all come to a stop at any moment, and we are not prepared. Luckily for those of us who are not already global history experts, the situation around Taiwan is relatively simple to understand. So this all starts with the end of the last imperial dynasty in China, the Great Qing, which ruled from 1636 to 1912. The 1911 revolution was fought to unseat the traditional monarchy and install a new national government, which was a popular thing to do at the time, and the result was named the Republic of China. In theory, it should have functioned somewhat like the United States of America, but within like 3 years, the new president of China, Yuan Shikai, got caught up in a power trip and decided that he'd actually prefer to rule his own imperial dynasty rather than lead a new republic. Obviously, that didn't go over very well with the rest of the people who had literally just fought to end this exact kind of thing. So by 1915, yet another civil war was on in China. It would take until 1928 for competing factions and rival warlords to settle down enough to form a new nationalist government with its capital in Nanking. For the next decade, things were pretty good. The communist Red Armies continued to push back against nationalist rule, but were largely decimated on the battlefields. The government maintained stability in the nation right up until the Empire of Japan decided to launch a full-scale invasion of the Republic of China in 1937. This would go on until the end of World War II, after the Japanese had been thoroughly pulverized by the United States Air Force. The expulsion of the Japanese left behind a power vacuum that would see the weakened Republic of China now faced with an old adversary, the Communist-aligned People's Liberation Army. Civil war was back on. This era gave rise to Mao Zedong and the eventual overthrow of the ROC by the Communist Rebel Army. The People's Republic of China would establish a new government out of Beijing. To escape Chairman Mao's rule, the remaining loyalists to the old Republic of China fled the mainland and took up refuge on the island of Taiwan. And that is where they've remained to this day. Having never accepted governance by the new People's Republic, Taiwan became a nation under the Republic of China, independent from the mainland, with their own constitution and a democratically elected government. There has never been peace or acceptance between mainland China and Taiwan, but there has never been outright conflict either. The PRC claims that there is only one China and that Taiwan is a part of it, while the ROC maintains that they are independent and self-governed. And we, as the people of the Western nations, would not care the least bit about any of this if it were not for one existentially important product: silicon microchips. Here in the 21st century, the island of Taiwan has come to be defined by its production of advanced microchips. In order to create a microchip, you have to start with a semiconductor material, which in our case is going to be silicon. The thing about silicon is that it's kind of like a rock, but also kind of a metal at the same time. This means that it has conductive properties when needed, but can also act as an insulator, hence semiconductor. And this ability makes it ideal as a switching mechanism because it can both transmit and block an electrical signal. The key to making an electronic device work is to control the flow of electricity through the various circuits using switches and regulators. Think of binary code, ones and zeros, off and on. All you really need is a switch. In the early 20th century, this was accomplished using vacuum tubes. If you ever look inside an old radio or TV from the 1940s or 50s, you'll see these glass tubes inside. They kind of look like little straight-sided light bulbs. These tube-based circuits put a major limitation on what could be accomplished with electric devices because the tubes were so bulky and so fragile. This is why the first computers of the 1950s would take up an entire room. They had to fit in thousands of these vacuum tubes and all the wires that connect them. By the mid-1960s, the tube-based circuit had started being replaced by the transistor, which is just a tiny device that can amplify or switch an electrical signal. And these transistors can be etched onto a semiconductor material along with intricate connections to create a microchip. This is what gave way to the modern era of compact electronic devices. The earliest chip had just 2, 4, or 6 transistors on one piece of silicon, but over time, engineers quickly figured out how to make smaller and smaller transistors that could be packed in tighter on increasingly smaller chips. By as early as 1965, Gordon Moore, the founder of Intel, had predicted that the number of transistors on computer chips will double approximately every 2 years, and for the most part, Moore's law has held true right into the 21st century. That's how we managed to get a computer down from the size of a refrigerator to the size of an iPhone. It's not alien technology, it's just simple transistors. Billions of tiny switches condensed onto a piece of silicon the size of a thumbnail. This phenomenon is what gave way to Silicon Valley in the United States. Apple, IBM, Intel, all of these amazing chip technologies were being developed and built in Central California. This makes the United States an economic and technological powerhouse, and in turn, this allows them to create the most advanced military on the face of the Earth. The space shuttle, the F-14 fighter jet, self-guided cruise missiles, stealth bombers, these were all made possible by silicon chips made in America. But these chips are not easy to make. They are actually very quickly becoming the most difficult product in the world to manufacture because everything just keeps getting smaller and smaller and requiring higher levels of precision. You can't just make a chip in a factory, you need a fab, which has more in common with an operating room than a production line. Because at this scale, even one speck of dust could spoil an entire chip. This is not the kind of precision that America is really known for, but Japan sure as hell is. The Japanese learn fast and pretty quickly. They're flooding the market with their own silicon microchip technology. Compact Nikon cameras, Casio digital watches, Sony Walkman cassette players. Japanese technology is killing the game, and now they're making chips so good and so cheap that American companies would rather buy from Japan than make it themselves. That is a problem because the United States government knows that the key to their superiority on the global stage is in these microchips. They can't allow anyone else to gain the lead. So the import of all silicon chips from Japan to the US was blocked in 1987 by new trade regulations from the American government. This effectively squashes any chance of Japan becoming a global chip supplier because the world's biggest customer just became off limits. So the US is safe from the Japanese, but that still doesn't solve their chip manufacturing problem. Steve Jobs wants to put an Apple computer in every home, but that's just not possible when microchips are expensive and scarce. Let's go back to Taiwan. In spite of the fact that they have been staring down the monster that is the People's Republic of China, Taiwan has been thriving in the second half of the 20th century. They are raising a generation of smart, ambitious, young people who are going to America to study to become engineers. The government of Taiwan, also known as the Republic of China, don't forget our history lesson, that will be important, they don't want to lose all of this perfectly good talent to the US. So they put a ton of money on the table and they tell these young people, if you come back home after university, we will pay you to start your own company in Taiwan. So now, thousands of these American-trained engineers come back to Taiwan to start cutting-edge new businesses. One of these young people was named Morris Chang, and his company was Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company Limited, better known as TSMC. Chang had a perfectly simple business model. He knew that the Americans could design amazing chips, but they were struggling with the cost and complexity of manufacturing them. So, TSMC was founded, with only one concern: making chips. They had no interest in the design of those chips, the devices they would go into, or the software that controlled them. This was all left up to their American customers. So Taiwan wasn't seen as a competitor like Japan. They were simply a facilitator. American companies send their design to TSMC, and then they receive their chips in a timely manner at a reasonable price. And this extended to any country. Japan and South Korea could have their chips made in Taiwan. Even mainland China is loving this because they may not be able to build microchips, but they can mass produce all of the devices that these chips are being put into. This would prove to be a game changer for the electronics and computer industry. Personal computers exploded across the world. Laptops, cell phones, CD players, GPS navigation. It's all plentiful and affordable, and the chips just keep getting better and better and smaller until we all have a super-powered smartphone in our pockets. This propels Taiwan to the forefront of a new global economy, and they absolutely dominate it. By the 2020s, 92% of all the advanced chips in the world are made in Taiwan. So all of these major American tech companies like Nvidia, AMD, Apple, Tesla, none of them make their own chips. TSMC does. Pretty much the only US company that kept making their own chips at home was Intel. This means that the world needs Taiwan, and that created something known as the Silicon Shield that would protect the tiny island nation from their biggest existential threat. The leaders of TSMC and Tesla are stubborn and meticulous, and they have to be because every day they wrestle with geopolitical hurdles beyond their control. But because of their innovation and long-term vision, their companies are built to endure the volatility that comes along the way. The rest of us may not be so lucky. Every day, the gap between the poor and the rich is getting wider. According to a recent study, 1/3 of workers now expect to retire at age 70. That is, if they can retire at all. After over a year of federal monetary tightening, Bloomberg analysts are calling traditionally conservative investments like treasury bonds useless as a hedge against stock losses. But innovators among us know there's always opportunity in times of chaos. The wealthy's oldest hedge quietly surpassed its pre-pandemic value. And it wasn't bonds, it wasn't gold, it was fine art. And thanks to our sponsors at Masterworks, you can now diversify and hedge against inflation by investing in million-dollar artwork from names like Picasso, Banksy, and Monet. Masterworks has acquired over $750 million worth of contemporary art, and each of their 15 exits thus far have delivered a profit to their investors. Performance of exited investments is not representative of artwork that has not yet sold, and past performance is not indicative of future results, but it's easy to see why over 750,000 people have jumped on board. Demand is on the rise, so there's usually a waitlist, but our subscribers can get priority access to get started today. Just click the link in the description. See important disclosures at masterworks.com/about/disclosure. You may have been left wondering something from our section of Chinese history. I know I was. Why didn't Mao's army move to finish off the ROC on Taiwan once and for all? Well, that's exactly what the People's Army tried to do at the Battle of Guningtou in October 1949. This was supposed to mark the final chapter of the Civil War, a crushing defeat of remnants of the ROC. The People's Army greatly overestimated their capability to perform an amphibious landing. They didn't know how to attack an island from the sea. They'd spent decades fighting on plains and mountain ranges. Plus, the ROC weren't as defeated as they may have appeared. After regrouping on Taiwan, they were able to form a defense force of 40,000 soldiers who covered the beachheads with thousands of landmines and built hundreds of defense bunkers along the coast. They hunkered down and waited for Mao's army. When the PRC troops moved on Taiwan, they didn't bring a navy. They showed up in a fleet of wooden fishing boats. Of the 9,000 soldiers who actually made it all the way to Taiwan, 4,000 were killed and the remaining 5,000 were captured. The ROC maintained a ruthless defense of their island. Anyone on Taiwan found to be colluding with the PRC was publicly executed in the streets of Taipei by firing squad. It was a brutal but necessary strategy as they awaited the next round of invasion. But it never came. Chairman Mao was quickly occupied supporting North Korea in the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, where Chinese troops would suffer over 1 million casualties. Then there was the Cultural Revolution to deal with, and then Mao was dead. But his successors never took their eye off Taiwan. The ultimate goal of the People's Republic has always been the One China policy that would see all Chinese land and people submitting to one rule under the PRC. As mainland China grew in strength over the decades, they were able to carry out this plan slowly and quietly in areas like Tibet, where few other nations really noticed or cared about what was going on. But the silicon shield created by the semiconductor industry protected Taiwan. If people there started being forcibly relocated and disappeared, the world would take notice. And the nations that relied on TSMC chips, like the United States, went one step further, promising to defend Taiwan with military force if the PRC ever made any move to intervene. The resulting forced stalemate still exists to this day. The PRC is not shy to demonstrate that they now have the Navy and Air Force capability to invade Taiwan at any time, but they never crossed the line that would trigger a global military conflict, or at least they haven't yet. It's hard to look at the current invasion of Ukraine by the Russian military and not think of China and Taiwan, wondering what comes next. But there are some key differences at play. For one, there's nothing of value for Russia in Ukraine. Putin doesn't think twice about reducing entire cities to rubble. The same is not true for Taiwan. If the chip foundries and the infrastructure to support them are destroyed in an all-out military conflict, then it would set the entire world back by decades. It's a no-win situation. At worst, what we might see is a full-scale blockade of the island by the PRC Navy. Think of Planet Naboo in Star Wars Episode 1. Nothing gets in or out, and international trade in semiconductors comes to a complete standstill. It's hard to say what the ultimate outcome of that would be, but it gives the PRC the ability to strong-arm both Taiwan and the rest of the world without having to fire the first shot. They could starve the island into submission. Unfortunately for us, it's somehow taken up until just the last few years for the United States government to fully appreciate the scale of the problem with Taiwan. Donald Trump got a start with banning certain Chinese companies like Huawei from doing business in the US, but it took until Joe Biden for a total ban on the export of any microchip designs or software from US companies to Chinese ones. American citizens are now banned from working for Chinese chip companies, and any company around the world that uses US technology to produce chips is blocked from doing business with Chinese firms. The goal of all of this is to move chip manufacturing back to US soil. This is the same thing that's being done with lithium batteries and electric vehicles. The government is providing massive amounts of funding and tax breaks for US companies to establish new manufacturing infrastructure here in North America. It can be the United States, Canada, or even Mexico, just as long as the manufacturing is done on our side of the ocean, where we have total control over the supply chain. And this strategy is working. In 2022, Intel announced a brand new $20 billion investment into a mega fab located in Ohio. Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger said that he expects the site to eventually become the largest silicon manufacturing location in the world, covering 2,000 acres and supporting 8 individual fabs. The next fab location for TSMC isn't being built in Taiwan, it's under construction right now in Arizona. So the United States is fighting back, and they are moving away from being totally dependent on foreign chips. But this is a long game, and it takes years to build these fabs and billions of dollars. A lot can change even before these current projects get up and running. So until then, the tiny island nation of Taiwan remains the global powerhouse of silicon chip manufacturing, the beating heart of modern technology. China has promised to conquer it, the US has sworn to defend it, and the whole world is watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up today if you liked it. That is so important for getting our content out to more people. If you enjoy the content, then you'd probably also enjoy our weekly newsletter, so sign up with the link down below at theteslaspace.com. A huge thank you to all of our Patreon supporters who are listed on the screen now. You help us make the best content we can, and we really appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.